Okay, it's really fun to be here, I must say. It's just joyful. And you have wonderful students in the high school. I'm sure they're wonderful from all ages, except maybe those 9-year-olds from time to time. But it is a great joy, wonderful school, very warm, at least in the important ways, very warm. I mean, there's a little bit of chilly air blowing around here, but that has nothing to do with feelings, so thank you. And I did teach, we called it early childhood at the beginning of my career, and usually we named it kindergarten. So I've had the great pleasure of doing the whole stream. And now it's time for me to flow away. This is my 50th year. Yeah, and so it's very fun. And I began in Toledo, Ohio, believe it or not. I grew up in Toledo. Began by substitute teaching in public schools there, some of which I pass on my way down this way, which is really kind of fun. And you know, for me it's very emotional coming to that place where the Lincoln Highway is marked, and then there's a place where the streams and rivers flow to the Ohio instead of Lake Erie. So everything is flowing down the Ohio, the Mississippi, and then where I live, it's flowing, you know, out to the Atlantic that way. So this is really exciting to be here, and I just love it. Lecture, talk, I don't know what this is, but we will explore a few ideas about being 9 years old. And there's no way it will be nearly as much fun as it was last week when we were singing and dancing in the faculty meeting and just totally enchanted. But here we go. So, yes, first of all, does anyone actually have a memory of being 9? I'm not necessarily going to ask you to say it, but interesting. Okay, just, you know, live with that for a moment or two, because it is a really interesting moment. And as we know, oh, look at this chalkboard. So, you know, if you think of birth here, and you think of going to Ohio State over here. Actually, no, you're going to go to the University of Michigan. You could also say Miami University, whatever. But anyway, here we begin, and we're going along this path, and about halfway through is 9. So it's halfway between being born, being 18, and going off to seek your fortune, or at least seek something else other than your parents. And wow, it's pivotal. So let's ponder this for a moment. Some children today are going through this a little bit earlier. Some are right around 9, some are a little bit later, but it is a pivotal midway point. So if we think of, you know, these early years, you have such wonderful early childhood classrooms here. And then around this moment is maybe first grade. And then maybe here is 9th grade. It's a wonderful stream. And between these years, typically 1st and 9th grade, 1st through 8th grade, many schools have a class teacher, right, who guides you through so many phases. Some schools do it differently. They have a class teacher 1 through 5, and then 6th grade, they have someone else. Some schools have a lot of blocks taught in 8th grade by high school teachers. It varies. And everything I say is meant to be true, but it might not be completely true for any individual school. But in any case, these are very special years. And this part of the time, say first into kind of like 3rd grade, you know, you have children still with a little bit of a sense of unity with the cosmos. and a sense of belonging. And then things will happen around 9, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you have a few wonderful years, maybe from 9 to, let's say, perhaps 11, something like that, 11 and a half, where after going through this 9-year change, so to speak, there's a kind of equilibrium. So this might be till about 11. And then a little bit later, we'll have the next phase through the 8th grade. And these each have, well, let's put 14 years here. These each have a kind of different flavor. And you might say, as much as the early childhood, we were talking about this yesterday, is about doing, and the grades are about teaching of feeling, emotional life, emotional intelligence, and the high school is about conceptual, analytical thinking. These phases in here also kind of reflect that. So up to age 9, approximately, there's still this lingering early childhood feeling, and the students still, for the most part, look on their teachers as gods and goddesses. Not that they would never make a mistake, but still, this reverence. They are priests and priestesses, we could say. And then around 9 comes the crisis we'll be talking about. And then comes this sort of heart of childhood. And then this age starts heading really towards high school thinking, intense skepticism, and it kind of mirrors a little bit more what is happening later. So there is that moment in the middle, around 9. It could be around 8. It could be some children 10. I once had a high school student at age 15, I swear had not gone through that change yet. Very extraordinary person. Later became an architect. Who knows why, but did. Yeah, so it can vary, but nonetheless, there are certain commonalities. And the curriculum, of course, addresses it. You'll be there soon. In most wonderful ways. So let's talk first off about some challenges. And let me just look at my notes for a second. Okay, let's call this a season of 4 special challenges. Mood, fears, alienation, and adults. So we'll put these as big challenges. Mood, fears, alienation, and adults. These are big challenges that will come. I'm just going to write over that other word because that's exactly what's happening. And then there are some other things that will come a little bit later in our chat here today. And let's put them over here as kind of like, oh, this is very fun. Possibilities for grown-ups that can help with all of this. These will get explained. Diaries. And, oh yes, let's put this one, destiny. Okay, this is kind of a mess, but that's all right. Because things get messier in many ways as we get older. Okay, so the mood of the 9-year-old child, first of all, it's very simple to remember. They often become very moody, whereas they've been more even for their early childhood. Suddenly they have shifts in mood, and especially can become very withdrawn, and maybe even suspicious. It's kind of a challenge, especially for parents perhaps with their first child. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth children get easier. But to watch this literal fall out of paradise is disheartening, disconcerting. And this moodiness and escaping to the bedroom perhaps and slamming the door can happen. But it's got a positive side as well, which we'll come back to in a moment. Fears. The dark. Being adopted. Not belonging in a certain family. Parents dying. That comes up a lot. That they're suddenly worried their parents will die. Strange things. Mirrors. One child I remember actually had a fear of a certain hole in the wall. Never had worried about that before, ever. Strange little phobias come up. Also a positive side there, which we'll come back to in a minute. Alienation. Oh my goodness. So one child said to me once, they had been to Cedar Point. It was not as much fun as I thought. And I asked, was it the rides or, what was it? And the child said, because we were always in crowds, but I always felt really alone, really by myself. So wow, being in a crowd of people and feeling alone was so poignant. Alienation also from one's own self. So one child said to me once, it was recess time, everyone was supposed to be going out. This child was a little bit late going out. I looked, they were crying, and I asked why. The child replied, because I'm having an argument with myself. Whoa, that's big. And it so happened that I answered, I don't know whether it was the right thing or not, but I have those every day for myself. And the child replied with a big smile, I thought it was only me. So first off, there is that, divorce inside oneself, alienated from one's own self, an argument with yourself. And then secondly, imagining they were the only person who ever had that happen. Wow, that's powerful. And then the adults. The adults are not as elevated and as perfect as they once were. Now, it may be that your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old sometimes doesn't want to do what you suggest, but you're still kind of the cosmic presence. But around 9, many children start really noticing faults, and oftentimes they are right on. So, which is hard to be a grown-up, and oh my goodness, this child telling me. So one day, at the very beginning of 4th grade, most of the students in the class had gone through this change, but not every single person. And there was one student who liked to read aloud to the class, one of those types who likes to hear their own voice, right? And I was allowing this. It was snack time, and this child was reading aloud to the class. And in the text, I don't even remember what book it was. I don't think it was the Little House books, but something along those lines. The word hypocrite came up. And this child just read it seamlessly. And then another child jumped up from their desk and said, "What's that?" And then sat down. And a few other children tried to explain. And somebody came pretty close saying, "Well, that's the kind of person who says something, but then they don't do it," which was actually not a bad definition. And this jumping up child jumped up again and said, "That's my dad." Sort of like had a label, age 9. Whoa. So the adults fall in a certain sense. Just like the children have fallen out of paradise, the adults also fall. So let's take a minute to think about some positive sides of these things. And of course there are many more, but let's just stick with a few. We don't know when they're going to college, or if they are going to college, which is also fine. Mood. Well, try this on for size. You know, this is a way, all these moods, and this moodiness and this inwardness is actually the precursor to being consciously, later on, compassionate. You have to sort of be a student of moods and feelings and emotion to later be able to offer help. So it's like a baby step. And they're kind of wallowing in it because they don't have the capacity to think beyond themselves to a certain extent yet. But it is sort of the beginning of real compassion, real consciousness. So there's something very positive there. Fears. Well, fears, you know, another consciousness raising phase of life. If you're afraid of something, it means somehow you know that there are consequences. You know, if you're suddenly afraid, I don't know about the hole in the wall, but you're suddenly afraid that your parents may leave you. That's a big, heavy thought, but that is part of becoming a free, independent adult oneself. If you are afraid of storms, that's another pretty typical one. It doesn't necessarily mean you must grow up to be an insurance claims adjuster, but it does mean you're thinking about consequences. And you're thinking about, you know, nature is not just always enfolding and unifying. Nature is hard. And there are things that happen in nature that are kind of shocking to children of this age when they see the hawk catch the prey, for example. But that is part of life. And, you know, we don't take our 3-year-olds to a video of hawks and prey. That wouldn't be appropriate for all kinds of reasons. But when they reach this age and they have these worries and fears about natural phenomenon, it makes sense. That's the way of the knower, the scientist. When they have fears about their parents, that makes sense. It's a time for the parents who are perhaps being criticized to be even more kind and sensitive. So there's a positive side there. The alienation, I mean, it's hard to think of this word in a super positive way, but it is the pathway to becoming a true individual. If you are just so in love with everyone all the time and you've never stepped aside in some way, you can't fully develop your own individuality. So that's also like a baby step. This kind of feeling of, I was in the crowd, but I felt so alone. That's the individual. And you know, you see little hints of it at age 3, and other hints sometimes right around 7, and then big time around 9. The adults. Well, I think many children are very forgiving of all their teachers, their Grammys, their aunts and uncles, their parents. This could take decades, but you know, they will at some point come to see, wow, what their parents did and who they were. So all of these, and there are many more things we could put up there, all of these have also a shining underside too. It's part of growing up. What about some really positive activities or thoughts? Okay. You know, it really is a wonderful moment for parents to start contemplating their child away from the child. So when the child is finally in bed, and you have 1 minute, even just 1 minute, to sit somewhere very quietly and just ponder your child that day and try it, see if it works. Let me know if it doesn't, because it might not work anymore. Ponder something that was so precious and beautiful when they were tiny, and ponder that they're going to solve some huge world problem, 60 years from age 9. Don't keep them stuck in that moment. Just keep thinking of the stream of time, something that is just so precious from very early days, and some imagination. You might be wrong, it doesn't matter, but just the process of imagining what they might do at age 68, 69, 70, 75. 60 seconds. That's it. You don't even have to light a candle. You don't even have to have a silk table. You could, but we once had a part-time strings teacher. I think some of you might appreciate this. Many years ago, who didn't know anything about Waldorf schools, but was a very good strings teacher, and then left at a certain point to take a more full-time job. And someone asked this person when they were leaving, well, what have you learned from your Waldorf experience? And the reply was, when in doubt, drape it with silk. Hey, you know what? We're reading Parsifal in the 11th grade, and I can't tell you how many times we come across a different type of silk that is covering someone or something. And yeah, so you don't even have to have that, but that contemplation, it's not, nothing is required other than focus for 60 seconds. It can be really helpful. Teachers are doing this with the children in their class. Okay. Now, needlework, of course, needlework is always healing and helpful. But I have to tell you that one year, because, speaking of strings, the students are learning instruments, and the thing is, some of them don't want to practice. That's very typical. Because, what's practice? Practicing your violin or your cello or whatever. Well, you're in a room, maybe making not so beautiful sounds, and you are hearing all of your mistakes. And alone, without a coach standing there every single second, you're supposed to try to fix them. And nobody's saying to you, you got this, every other minute. Wow, there's something very powerful about this practice, literally, practice of practicing a string instrument around this age. Because you're forced to be kind of alone. So one parent devised the following, and I thought it was so brilliant, I have to pass it along to you many years later. The child did not want to practice. So the mom said, every time you practice, I'm going to do needlepoint. And she was pretty quick at it too. So that was a ritual. Dinner, practice with needlepoint, and then dessert. So the child got pretty proficient practicing, and the mom sat, and every single minute that child was practicing was doing needlepoint. And over the course of a year or two, that was quite a stack of beautiful pillows that the child could see. So sometimes turning something that's a chore into something beautiful visually is really powerful, and maybe more wonderful for years and years than a sticker chart or something like that, I don't know. But when a child is faced with homework or practicing or something that requires them to be a little bit alone, maybe a parent can do something that's going to be visible later. So that's positive thought. And something else, this is more for the children, but can be amazing this age. Old-fashioned stationery with a whole bunch of stamps. They can write letters to grandparents. And this is very, very wonderful because they need to feel this wonderful respect for adults, maybe not necessarily their parents. They can write letters to children who are in the children's hospital. It can just be simple drawing, a few words, put a stamp on it. It's agency. Another thing that can be really powerful around this age is diaries. So the gift of a diary to a 9-year-old going on 10 is powerful. Another thing is a special shelf in a closet, or their own closet for the first time, or a treasure box, some kind of box that is just for them to put into it. You can do this even as a teacher, just boxes, mailing boxes from Staples or wherever. They decorate them. It's their treasure box. It's their private stuff. Nobody looks in there. So acknowledging this inwardness and this separation and this need for privacy. It's really interesting that there are cultural differences with privacy and what that involves. And some cultures really prize a fair amount of privacy and others don't. And that's kind of fascinating for you to ponder, because everything your child brings to you as a challenge is an opportunity for growth, contemplation, and just joy of life. So, some years ago with a very dear friend whose mom was American, but she grew up in Rome and her dad was Italian, told me, in Italian, we really don't have a word for privacy. I said, whoa. And she said, yeah, people come out into the streets. That's where their social life is. When she went to visit her boyfriend who lived in Seattle, she was bereft. Where are all the people? The streets are empty. The streets should be packed with people. So it's kind of interesting culturally, and every family has a culture too. And your child is starting to navigate and learn your family culture and maybe compare it with other families. This is fantastic. It's the global education. Okay. And then this part, I think, destiny, it's just a hint. So how many of you have children living in your home who are not yet 9? They will be. They're not, okay, that's a fair amount. That's great. Okay. So just consider really listening carefully to what they say about their likes and dislikes, and you could write some of this down. You could have a little journal. The baby books that for the first child are so full, the second child not so full, and the third child maybe doesn't get one. Well, you could have a little journal somewhere and just jot down, it could be on your phone even, a few little telling remarks from your 9-year-old. Because this is not an extensive scientific, proven fact by any means. But there are thinkers out there who have this idea, this notion that around 9, you start to know your own destiny. It's very unconscious. So, for a long time, I really was quite skeptical of that. But then, in Toledo, I had to clean out my parents' house about 10 years ago. And I found there saved a letter from me to my great-grandmother. And that was fascinating. Because first off, I went to very conventional Toledo public schools. There was a kind of colorful sun on it that looked like a Waldorf sun. Ooh, that's odd. And then the following words were there. Dear great-grandmother, I hope you are well. I hope you like your church. That was the topic of conversation. And you asked what I'm doing. Well, I went to the museum 5 times to see the show about Marie Antoinette. It was very good. It was kind of like ended. Okay. And then something like, I want to read more and more of those stories. I love your great-granddaughter. But then when I thought about it after reading this, I thought, wow, I was 9, very unconscious in many ways, but in truth, how have I spent my life? Being a history teacher, teaching history of art, like Ms. Manship, in a whole lot of museums, and making Waldorf drawings, and there it was in this little tiny letter. So I'd totally forgotten about that, of course, but you might just look from time to time, teachers too, but especially parents, and if something catches your interest, jot it down and wait 20, 30, 40 years and see what happens. Because this is such a pivotal point in a person's life that there may be clues to what's coming ahead, or even if not outright predictions, kind of like the child in some way is saying, look over there, that's where I'm going to be, look over there. So anyway, it's a wonderful time, and then we get to the next moment around 12, middle school, puberty. That's a whole different thing. But now we have 10 minutes, and I would be curious for observations, questions, complaints, or outrage, or joy, any of these. So anyone have a thought they would like to give to us today? Yay, thank you so much.
Can you speak a little bit about like peer relationships at that age?
Yeah, great, thank you. It's complicated, generally complicated. A lot of gossip, rumors and gossip. This is part of the deal. And, oh, okay, here's something else. Child comes home with a pronouncement about a particular other child. That may not be completely letter of the law true. And this is hard for anyone, teachers, parents, because of course you trust children, and of course they are speaking the truth. What they may be speaking is their feelings about this other child, which have changed. And when they report that so-and-so is very mean to me, it may be not at all true. It may be somewhat true. It may be that is the child's feeling, and that needs to be addressed. But it's not necessarily quote unquote, what is objectivity anyway, you know, objective. Rumors, gossip, changing friendships. I don't know if this is still happening, but it was 8, 9, 10 years ago. Blood sisters, you know, pricking the finger and trying to mix the blood, making a new family also, kind of consciously. So that's a great question. Lots of social dynamics. Yeah. And some of it's really tender and poignant, and some of it's kind of messy. And it's hard to remember. The perception is real, but did that person really tie them up? You know what I'm saying? You may come home and say, so-and-so tied me up at recess. And of course, it's so, I mean, you have to. You respond to your child. Oh my goodness, where is that teacher? Where's the recess monitor? But tell them now, right? We were talking last week. Like, tell them ahead of time. Something was saying, the parents. So it could be that there really is something there that's in the realm of feeling, that's getting other words kind of attached to it, and it needs love and care. But it might not be exactly what they say. That's a great question. Yeah, new friends, blood sisters, blood brothers. There's a lot of rivalry, and yet also sometimes camaraderie and consensus about doing something really nice for someone else. A group of third, fourth graders, like they'll come up with a plan to do something really nice for the knitting teacher or something like that. It's a great moment. Great question. Yes?
Well, not so much question, more like along the same line with the alienation piece with those friendship groups. They oftentimes will feel like they're pulling themselves away in the situation and will be like, I am so alone, I have no friends. They'll go home and be like, Mom, I have no friends. Nobody wants to play with me. Everybody's mean to me. And so that's another really big piece of that social aspect, even though the teacher may be seeing something completely different. But it's that internal feeling that they're feeling within their friend group.
Yeah, absolutely. They feel alone because they don't share everything in the same way. They're starting to have their own path, their own desires, their own opinions. And so even if one little thing is off, suddenly that person's not their friend anymore, and they feel bereft. And some children do feel like they have no friends. That's another difficult time often in a school setting because, parents want their children to have friends. And I think in our Waldorf schools, parents want their children to be loved, and they feel that from the teachers, but they want them also loved from their peer group, and they want them to learn to read, and they want them to be able to play sports, and they want them to go to college. So these are like big parent worries, and they kind of come at different phases, and the more we all can do, parents and faculty and administration alike, to help is good. Great question. Yeah. Who else has a thought, an observation? Help us, Carlo.
Just something, it popped in my head, and this is a question across the grades, but what if a new child joins the class in the fourth grade during this 9-10 change? What can we do to help that? What do we see in the children if somebody new is introduced?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to not give a definitive answer, but I will say there is one technique that is very helpful when I'm talking now about a class teacher. I'm not talking so much about parents. Of course, parents are going to welcome a new family into the school. Absolutely, they will. But in terms of the children in the class, by that point, the class teacher knows their class really well. And they know who is innately suspicious, who is innately compassionate, who is kind of like the journalist digs out the dirt, who is a doer. And so, before the new child appears, maybe the day before, could have a discussion and let those fourth graders, if they're in fourth grade, or those third graders give ideas. But you can make really good use of this if you call on them in a certain order. So you know the class. So, so much of what we do in these schools, it's why I love making these wavy lines. It's about time, flowing time. Well, it kind of matters who you call on first for these types of emotional intelligence things. So first, you might want to call on a couple of people who might even say, I don't want a new child. I don't want a new kid. Start there. Then maybe you call on a couple who might say something like, yeah, because we have 12 or whatever the number is. And if somebody new comes, then it's not an even number anymore. So you got sort of the naysayers. Then you've got kind of the counters. I mean, these are all great human capacities. It's just how we use them, right? Then you get to somebody who might say, out of their own experience, well, I was new last year, And then, oh, that's interesting, and others start looking. And then you come gradually to the child who's going to give the moral to the story. You know, with one class, I had one always called on her last, because every sentence was like a little bit of a Tibetan jeweled statement. She just couldn't help it. So you don't waste that early on. You let them, you know, have their feelings. It's really okay, and we are all human. None of us are perfect. So you have this way of, when it's discussions like that or preparation for a new person, that you have an order, and you go through the rocky places, and then, you know, you move kind of from the naysayers, the counters, the worriers, to the people who might be observant in a slightly different way, to those who see possibilities, a little bit visionary, to the Tibetan Buddhist monk, right, at the end. And that's what you're left with. And they do listen to each other. So then a conversation, that takes maybe 15 minutes, then you can say, well, what could we do to help so-and-so feel happy? And then some of those naysayers at the beginning, they might also be your doers. And one of them might say, I'm going to go to the office and get another desk, or, you know, that they're already thinking about how to help. That was kind of around, that wasn't really an answer, but it was a story. You will probably have the last word.
No, I had a question. I have a student in my class, and it's like, the class kind of looks to this person, you know, he's like a big force. It's like, where would you put him in that lineup? Would you like end with like, would you start with him, or would you put him in the middle of like, if he's with it, you know, then they're gonna be like, oh, you know, it's like there's classes where like there's that person where like you get him on your team, then the rest will follow.
Great question. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know the child.
Yes.
But you do.
Yeah.
And you will figure that out. And it might be different in different situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's one of the beauties of these cohorts of children, is that you're creating harmony as much as possible, but you're not doing it by imposition from without. In other words, just rules. I mean, yes, rules are important, processes, protocols are important, but you're doing it like the bumper sticker used to say, Waldorf education, education from the inside out. That's what takes time. And that's why this time with a class teacher is really special, because I wouldn't dream of answering that unless I had been in there teaching 6, 7, 8 weeks, you know, but you know. And it might be different. And then, of course, sometimes there are mistakes, and that's okay too. Because, like the old story about the Persian rug weavers, you know, the challenge is, when a mistake is made, don't take it out. Make it into the most beautiful part of the rug. And we are lucky. We are so lucky because we have time. We really do. And, you know, I like to think of time as a growing plant. As much as I love Legos, I mean, it was a requirement in my household. Everyone must love Legos. You know, that's a very sort of unitary approach. Like, you have one Lego, then you put another, and then another. That's not how time and growing human beings work. And sometimes it seems like the season of discontent is long, but then many things happen really suddenly, and it's powerful. And so, yeah, so it's a little different, of course, in the early childhood, and it's also different in the high school, but it's a beautiful stream of time. Speaking of, it's 4:30, so thank you all.